Press a magic button for $1 million, but a stranger will die. In July 1976, the deputy director of the NSA receives a memo from NASA's Research Center leadership confirming that a man named Arlington Stewart has been successfully revived. On July 24, Stewart is discharged from the burn unit and promptly disappears without a trace. Later, Stewart constructs a device of unknown purpose, which he begins delivering to residential neighborhoods, though his intentions remain unclear. In December of the same year, in Richmond, Virginia, Arthur and Norma Lewis are awakened at 5:45 a.m. by a knock at the door. A groggy Norma reluctantly goes to check, peeking through the peephole just in time to see a car driving away. When Norma opens the door, she finds a small box on the porch. She brings it inside, and over breakfast, Arthur, Norma, and their son Walter examine the package. Inside, they discover a strange device with a button, covered by a transparent dome, but no key to unlock it. The family also finds a card stating that a Mr. Stewart will visit them at 5 p.m. None of them know anyone by that name, so they assume the package was delivered by mistake and go about their day. Norma sees Walter off to the school bus before heading to the same school where she works as a literature teacher. During her class, a student named Charles suddenly asks why she walks with a limp. Embarrassed, Norma pretends not to understand, but Charles insists she show her foot to the class. Reluctantly, Norma removes her boot, revealing a foot with 4 amputated toes, leaving the class in stunned silence. Soon, the bell rings, and the students leave the classroom, with Charles casting a suspicious smirk as he walks out. Meanwhile, Arthur, who works at NASA, attends a press conference about the Viking project, which involved Mars exploration and for which Arthur developed a unique camera. During the conference, a journalist questions NASA Director Norm Cahill about the NSA's connection to the project, noting the presence of an NSA representative in the room. The attendees begin speculating that NASA is hiding something, but Cahill refuses to comment, leaving the rumors unanswered. Later, Arthur returns to the lab, where, in addition to his primary work, he is quietly working on a personal project, a prosthetic for Norma. It's revealed that when Norma was 17, her brother accidentally dropped a dumbbell on her foot, breaking a toe. At the hospital, the doctor used an X-ray machine but became distracted, ultimately exposing Norma's toes to dangerous levels of radiation, resulting in their amputation. At school, Norma is summoned by the principal, who regretfully informs her that the employee tuition discount for their children will be discontinued next semester. This news shocks Norma, as the family is already struggling financially. By evening, a disheartened Norma returns home, trying to distract herself with television when the doorbell rings again. Answering the door, she finds a stranger with a scarred, burned face, the mysterious Mr. Stewart. The enigmatic man inquires if they received the package containing the button unit and asks to come inside, claiming he has a business proposition for them. Norma invites Stewart into the kitchen, where he reveals a key that unlocks the glass dome protecting the button.
Voila.
Stewart explains that if Norma presses the button, 2 things will happen. Somewhere in the world, an unknown person will lose their life, and she will receive $1 million in cash. To emphasize his point, he shows a stunned Norma a briefcase filled with bundles of cash and hands her $100 as a token of gratitude for letting him into the house. Norma struggles to believe the offer is real and asks who Stewart works for. However, he states that the deal comes with 3 strict rules. He cannot reveal the identity of his employers. Norma cannot discuss the offer with anyone except Arthur, and they have exactly 24 hours to decide. At 5 p.m. the following day, Stewart will return to retrieve the box and reprogram it for another family, who will face the same choice. Meanwhile, Arthur receives a certified letter from the astronaut corps. Excited, he opens it, only to be crushed upon learning his application has been rejected due to failing the psychological evaluation. Feeling lost about his next steps, Arthur confides in his boss, Cahill, who suggests he continue working on optics for a new camera. While valuable, this is far from the career Arthur had envisioned. That evening, Arthur returns home, and Norma tells him about Stewart's proposal. Initially, he dismisses it as a hoax, but Norma is convinced it's real. Arthur suggests they set the matter aside for the night to avoid being late for the theater. Norma locks the box in a room, and they leave. At home, their son Walter questions whether Stewart had visited, but Norma deflects his inquiries, mindful of the rule forbidding her from discussing the deal with anyone besides Arthur. During the play, both Arthur and Norma remain distracted by thoughts of the mysterious offer. Unbeknownst to them, a stranger watches them from the shadows. Later, back at home, Arthur examines the box, curious to understand its mechanics, only to find it completely empty inside.
No transmitter, no radio. If we push the button right now, there's no way he'd even know.
Arthur remains skeptical of Stewart's proposal, but Norma inexplicably trusts the stranger. That night in bed, Norma insists they'll never earn that kind of money on their own and should accept the offer to secure their family's future. Arthur, however, argues they can make do if he finds a better paying job. The next morning, Norma mentions postponing her surgery due to their financial situation. Arthur, trying to ease her doubts, suggests pressing the button to see what happens, but Norma hesitates, overwhelmed by fear. Unable to decide, Norma locks the box in a safe before they both leave for work. At the research center, aerospace engineer Jeffrey Carnes has a tense phone call with his terrified wife. She recounts witnessing a woman abducted from a store in broad daylight. Jeffrey urges her to lock herself inside until he gets home, unaware that a stranger is also watching him. Later that evening, Arthur returns home and shares that the $100 bill Stewart gave them is genuine. While Arthur struggles with the moral implications of causing someone's death, Norma rationalizes that the victim might not be an innocent person but a criminal. The tension builds until, in a brief moment of impulsivity, Norma presses the button before Arthur can stop her. Elsewhere, a neighbor calls emergency services after hearing screams and a gunshot from a nearby home. Responding officers discover a woman's lifeless body in the living room and her terrified daughter hiding in the bathroom. Not long after, Stewart arrives at the Lewis home with the promised $1 million. Shocked and guilt-ridden, the couple accepts the money as Stewart retrieves the box, reassuring them the offer will now be made to someone they don't know. Desperate for redemption, Arthur grabs the briefcase and chases after Stewart, begging him to take it back. But Stewart declines, leaving Arthur alone with the weight of their decision.
I'm sorry, Mr. Lewis. The button has been pushed.
Arthur manages to remember his car's license plate and writes it down to learn more about the strange man. Norma begins to regret her decision. She feels that by mentioning the strangers who will be given a new offer, Stewart hinted that soon they will become victims. Meanwhile, in the police station, Norma's father, Officer Dick Burns, is working on the case of the woman who was shot. It turns out to be the wife of Jeffrey Carnes, who fled in an unknown direction after the shot. The officers are shocked, as they can't believe how a caring husband and father who works at NASA could resort to a crime. On the other hand, the Lewis family's life begins to improve. Arthur finally gives his wife a prosthetic that allows her to walk without pain or limping, even in heels. The couple then attends Norma's sister's pre-wedding dinner. Her parents decide to play a game, where the gifts they received will be drawn between the guests. Arthur is the first to have the opportunity to choose a prize. He examines the boxes and then turns to the guests, meeting the gaze of Norma's student, Charles, who works as a waiter. The strange guy shows him a peace sign, after which an excited Arthur picks the plainest box, similar to the one Stewart brought them. The guests insist that Arthur open the box at the table, and he and Norma are horrified to find a photo of Stewart inside, before his injuries. Meanwhile, at home, Walter is talking to Dana, who suddenly notices someone's figure outside the window. The girl decides to distract Walter so he doesn't notice, and asks about her father's work. The boy leads her to the basement, where there is a lot of information about the Viking Mars landing, and tells her about the camera his father invented. At the party, Arthur asks Dick Burns to check Stewart's car, while Charles continues to watch him closely. Arthur feels uncomfortable under the strange guy's gaze and asks Norma's colleague who he is. The woman explains that Charles humiliated her in front of the class by forcing her to show her leg. At the same time, another waiter tells Norma that she has a phone call, after which he suddenly feels sick. Norma picks up the phone, and on the other end of the line, it's Stewart. He says he knows her husband contacted the police about his car, because he has people working for him, and now trouble is inevitable. Norma insists that they don't wish anyone harm and asks to be left alone, but
If you didn't want anyone to get hurt, you shouldn't have pushed the button.
Stewart also claims that the experiment will continue no matter what and urges them to listen to their conscience before hanging up, leaving Norma bewildered. Arthur once again feels Charles' gaze on him and lashes out, hoping to take revenge for the incident at school. Norma asks him to stop, and soon they leave the party. As they get into the car, they notice that the windshield reads no exit, and then, in the rearview mirror, they see Charles once again flashing them the peace sign. Back home, they find that Dana and Walter have already fallen asleep. Arthur decides to take Dana home, but she asks him to drop her off at a motel instead. On the way, the girl notices that his hands are stained, and Arthur asks what she means, fearing she knows something about the deal with Stewart. Dana, however, simply points to the wounds he got in a fight. She continues speaking in ambiguous phrases, confusing Arthur. Dana advises him to look into the beam of light to get rid of his problems, after which she suddenly becomes ill. It's as if she doesn't understand what she's saying, and then she passes out. Worried, Arthur takes her to the motel and decides to take a peek into her bag to learn more about the mysterious girl. He discovers an ID that shows her real name is Sarah Matthews. Suddenly, the girl regains consciousness and tells Arthur to leave quickly to avoid danger. She runs to her room, and all the other guests look at her strangely. Back in her room, Dana looks at a large map with pictures of the Lewis family, which she has likely been following for some time. Arthur returns home and asks where Norma met Dana. She tells him she met her on one of the school trips, and Arthur reveals the girl's real name. That night, Arthur is suddenly struck with the realization that he's seen Stewart before. He goes down to the basement and finds a photo of the man among the participants of the Viking mission. The next day, Stewart calls Norma again and reminds her not to contact the police anymore. Norma wants to meet with Stewart, but he tells her that he's currently in their backyard. At that very moment, a strange figure with his mouth wide open walks by outside. Stewart hangs up, and it turns out he's currently in a secret NASA laboratory. Meanwhile, an NSA agent demands the lunar landing module and hangar from Cahill. He also mentions that NASA staff will be involved in a secret mission but doesn't reveal any further details. Arthur decides to visit the police station, where Dick informs him that the car's license plate belongs to the NSA. Shocked, Arthur suddenly notices a photo of Jeffrey's deceased wife on the desk. Dick talks about the strange crime, and it turns out that Jeffrey shot his wife at the moment Norma pressed the button. Arthur asks to be taken to the crime scene, though Dick doesn't understand what has caught his interest. At Jeffrey's house, Arthur finds a photo of Stewart and a Polaroid picture of a human resource exploitation manual textbook with a catalog number on it. While Dick is distracted, Arthur decides to take the photo. While Norma and her mother are shopping, a woman runs up to them and, as if in a trance, says that the NSA knows about Stewart's experiment, and that all the test subjects are under 40, married, and have one child. The woman hands Norma a piece of paper and tells her to request a book with a specific number from the Richmond Library. She also warns her not to trust anyone, not even her husband. Before collapsing in a faint, Norma and Arthur independently head to the library, where a strange man continues to follow them. Arthur discovers the Lightning Book, which contains notes about how Stewart was struck by lightning. Just as he's about to leave, he is pursued by library patrons. He runs into the reading room, hoping to find an exit, but is blinded by light, from which Stewart's wife, Clemen, emerges. Meanwhile, Norma finds a video recording of the NASA hangar's destruction from a lightning strike several months ago, as well as a press conference in which a still healthy Stewart participated. The mysterious women then lead Norma to Stewart, who explains that after being struck by lightning, he can now communicate with extraterrestrial intelligence. Stewart asks what Norma felt when she first saw him, suspecting that it was pity. However, Norma asserts that she felt love, knowing the pain that such an injury could bring. Stewart asks her to hold his hand, and Norma loses consciousness. At the same time, Clemen declares that Stewart is testing them and leads Arthur into a room with 3 exits in the floor. 2 of them lead to eternal damnation, and only 1 leads to salvation. She extends her hand, and all the exits turn into columns of water. Remembering Charles' gesture, Arthur chooses the second exit, and the column of water engulfs him, carrying him through a brightly lit tunnel directly into the bedroom, where Norma is already waiting. She has no memory of how she got home from the library. The water floods the Lewis house, and Walter asks for an explanation, but his parents don't share anything with him. Meanwhile, Cahill secretly meets with a CIA agent, who explains that Stewart was struck by lightning right after receiving the first data from the Viking mission on Mars. Since then, no one has heard from Stewart, and he has turned into something else. He died shortly after being admitted to the burn unit, but a few hours later, in a morgue, he woke up and began laughing hysterically. Stewart was then transferred to a secret military hospital, and it was soon discovered that he had developed superhuman abilities, with his body healing 10 times faster than normal. The CIA agent later meets with Stewart and asks why he chose a box for his experiment. Stewart, or rather what he has become, says that boxes accompany people throughout their lives: home, car, television, and eventually a coffin. He also states that after the trials are over, he will hand over the data to his mysterious employers, and humanity's fate will be in their hands. Stewart claims that passing his test is very easy, you just have to avoid pressing the button. If people can't or won't sacrifice their personal desires for the good of the species, humanity has no chance of survival. His employers will be forced to speed up extinction. Then, all the zombified people working for Stewart, including Dana, head into a cloud of light. This is how they prepare for a new experiment in Massachusetts. Meanwhile, the Lewises are on their way to Norma's sister's wedding but can't relax. Arthur explains that the light flow he experienced seems to exist between worlds, and it's hard to describe in words. Meanwhile, people working for Stewart continue to watch them. Soon, Arthur begins to feel ill and runs outside. Suddenly, Jeffrey appears from around the corner and presses a gun to his temple. He says that Arthur has no chance left, but he can still be saved. Jeffrey puts him in his car and shows him the very book Human Resource Exploitation Manual, a secret CIA document. It turns out that people start feeling ill when Stewart invades their minds. Walter notices that his father has disappeared and sets off to find him, but Norma tries to stop him. Suddenly, several strange men emerge from behind the trees and abduct both Walter and Norma. Meanwhile, Jeffrey explains that Stewart kidnapped his daughter and Walter and is holding them at the same motel where Arthur dropped Dana off. It's some sort of transportation hub, with the pool acting as a transition gate. Jeffrey confesses that it was his wife who decided to press the button in their family, and as a result, he had to shoot her to save their daughter, since Stewart forced him to choose between them. Suddenly, a man dressed as Santa Claus appears on the road, clearly working for Stewart. At the last moment, Jeffrey slams on the brakes to avoid hitting him, but their car is then struck by a truck. Soon, the police arrive, led by Dick, but all they find in the car is Jeffrey's body. Arthur unexpectedly finds himself in a NASA hangar, where he's greeted by Cahill. The boss warns that any decision Arthur makes will have very serious consequences. After a while, Arthur and Norma return home, only to find Stewart waiting for them. He admits that he respects them and admires their behavior, but since they press the button, they won't be able to avoid the worst trial. Stewart explains that Walter's sight and hearing have been artificially disabled. Now they have two options. They can take the $1 million they were given and adjust to their son's limited abilities, or Arthur can shoot Norma. Walter will be healthy again, and the $1 million will be transferred to his account, which he can access when he turns 18. Norma wants to shoot herself to avoid involving Arthur, but Stewart insists that it's her husband who has to pull the trigger. Suddenly, Arthur grabs the gun and aims it at Stewart's head. Stewart warns that if Arthur shoots, Walter will remain disabled, Arthur will be sent to prison, and someone else will take his place. Before leaving, Stewart informs them that Walter is in the bathroom, and the couple rushes upstairs, hearing their son screaming for help. However, the door is locked from the inside, and Arthur asks Walter to step away from the door, but he can't hear him. In tears, Norma begs Arthur to shoot her because she doesn't want to see their son in such a state. She apologizes for her decision, and they kiss one last time, hoping to meet again in the afterlife. Just as Arthur finally decides to shoot, another couple presses that same button. Soon, the new couple is visited by Stewart, and a report of gunshot sounds comes into the rescue service again. Arthur rushes to the bathroom to check on Walter, and indeed, he can hear and speak once more. However, at that very moment, police officers storm the house, but instead of arresting him, Arthur is put into an NSA vehicle, and Cahill assures him that they will take care of him and his son. Meanwhile, Stewart takes the button from the new family and heads toward the next set of test subjects. Would you be willing to sacrifice a stranger's life for your own well-being? Share your thoughts in the comments down below, give us a like, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video.